Welcome to this workshop on preparing an abstract for a conference, presented by Jennifer Weller-Newton, Director of the Rural Health Academic Network, and myself, Rowan O'Hagan, Research Development and Governance Officer and Rural Health Academic Network Coordinator at North East Health, Wangaratta. We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are today and pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging. This workshop is supported by the Australian Government Department of Health, Rural Health Multidisciplinary Training Program. Our objectives for this workshop: by the end of this presentation and along with further reading, you will be able to demonstrate an understanding of the ethics requirements for public dissemination of health service data and projects, outline the recommended steps in constructing a conference abstract, and discuss how to structure an abstract if you don't have your data collection or analysis complete, and describe what EQUATOR is. Beginning with the ethics side of things. In our clinical work, we have guidelines that help us with our consideration of ethical review when doing research and quality assurance. The major guideline is the National Statement on Ethical Conduct in Research Involving Humans from 2018. And within the guideline, research is described as systematic investigation to establish facts, principles and knowledge. The NH and MRC also have a guideline around ethical considerations in quality assurance and evaluation activities from 2014. In this guideline, quality assurance is defined as the primary purpose is to monitor or improve the quality of service delivered by an individual or an organisation. As we know, research and quality assurance are on a continuum of activity. And in preparing your abstract for this upcoming conference, or for any presentation or publication, you need to think about what ethical review or authorisation you need for your abstract. There are several triggers which move your activity from being a quality assurance activity that you're conducting within your health service to being more broadly research, or to being an activity that really needs ethical review. And there's two levels of ethical review. There's the governance review within your organisation, and then there's full ethical review where your application goes to a human research ethics committee. And in this case, we're talking really about the governance review. And the sorts of triggers, the important triggers that mean that your standard quality assurance activity needs ethical review is where the activity potentially infringes on the privacy or professional reputation of participants, providers or organisations. So once you're doing an activity within your organisation, you need to think, how is that going to reflect on the participants, perhaps the clinicians within the organisation and the organisation overall. And if there's a possibility that people will be identified, there might be information about their clinical practice and the quality of their practice, that means that you should then go for ethical review before that information is disseminated publicly. If you're having secondary use of data, using data or analysis from what was a quality assurance project, but you're then turning it into research, that is another trigger for ethical review. The third one there is gathering information about the participant beyond that which is collected routinely. Testing of non-standard or innovative protocols or equipment. So it is something that you're doing that is new rather than something that you have doing quality assurance or clinical audit against. Then you need to think about ethical review. And likewise, if there's a comparison of cohorts. The last two there are less common in quality assurance activities, but nevertheless, they suggest that if these triggers are there, ethical review is required. So just thinking about how that might sort of look within a framework, you have your quality improvement or quality assurance activity that you're undertaking. If you decide there is a context where you would like to publish that information or present it at a conference, then you really should go for a level of governance and ethical review within your organisation. If the context included those NH and MRC triggers that I've just spoken about, it may remain as a quality assurance activity requiring ethical review, or it might actually then become a low or negligible risk human research activity and may need to go for ethics to the HREC or the Human Research Ethics Committee. If the context also includes some other considerations, then it's most likely that full ethics approval will be required. And these types of considerations are when we're researching or undertaking quality assurance with a vulnerable population, perhaps young children or people who are seriously ill. It could be research with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander populations, which need further consideration, and also other contexts that other vulnerable populations, such as people who might be in prison, people who don't have the capacity to necessarily speak for themselves or provide consent. So looking at the type of abstract that you might be planning to present, if your abstract is a literature review, a policy paper, or perhaps a systematic review that contains only currently published information and data, then ethics approval is not required. If it's a quality assurance project with governance pre-authorisation for publication, such as the ones we've been talking about, then in your application to submit an abstract, you should cite that governance approval. If it's a research project that's already had ethics committee approval and it's been conducted according to the protocol, you then cite that ethics approval with your submission. If you're reporting on the development of something that you're proposing to put together, an intervention or a procedure that you're thinking about doing but you haven't necessarily implemented yet, ethics approval is not necessarily required, but you will probably go to your health service for authorisation. That's really the recommendation, that you have that discussion with your health service and ensure that they're happy for you to be presenting that information.
What I say to particularly my students, I often will say, what's the story? What is it? What is this pitch that you actually want to create? So simple. It's about what happens. Sometimes we are often so engrossed in a topic that we sometimes forget there is a world of readers out there who may not actually have any prior knowledge of your topic. So simple does not mean being simplistic. Simple means it's cutting through a significant amount of data and information to find that simple story within the material. concrete is about abstracts that are constructed mainly of scholarly and scientific terms or complicated jargon are often doomed. So do not use grandiose, overblown or exaggerated words, as these may damage the credibility of your project. So save the statistics and the mathematical notations for that journal paper that you're going to write after you've presented at your conference. One way to keep an abstract concrete is to use thesaurus in Word for alternative words. And unexpected. What was unexpected in your study or project? So add a suggestion of surprise or intrigue to excite curiosity and a desire to continue reading the material. The storytelling can act actually as a guidepost to developing a really gripping and persuasive abstract. And there's one of the first things when you think, oh, I've seen this conference advertised. Oh, this looks really interesting. The RHAN conference for allied health and nursing. Oh, I wonder if I could put in that project we've been working on into this conference. So one of the first things you need to do is actually find the guidelines. And the guidelines that I'm shown on the screen at the moment are not for your the RHAN conference. These were guidelines for a particular international conference that I was applying for a couple of years ago. And I almost fell over backwards when I found these guidelines because I was doing this in a very jet-lagged state. I had just flown into London, and this is a little tip when you're doing conference abstracts: don't leave them to the last minute, because I literally jet-lagged and I had something like 4 or 5 hours to get this abstract together, and I hit the guidelines and oh my goodness me, I had 3 separate documents I had to fill out. It was incredibly complex. So we need to find the guidelines. So in finding the guidelines, what you need to do is you need to read them thoroughly before commencing. And as I say, I cannot stress enough, do not leave it to the last minute. So the 2021 RHAN Health Symposium coming together has got some clear guidelines. And in particular, if we look at these guidelines carefully, if you haven't looked at them already, it gives you some information about your abstract format. And this is important when you're putting an abstract together, that you're following the guidelines. You know, if they've asked for it to be in a font size and a particular size and type of font, then you stick to that size and type of font. It will tell you how many words you're allowed. You need to keep into that word allowance. You know, some reviewers on what they call scientific review committees for conference papers will reject papers if they're way over the recommended or required word allowance. The other thing that you have to think about is you need to think about any and for this particular conference, you've got the option of whether you want to submit for an oral or a poster presentation. So what do we want to do? So when you submit an abstract, in this case, you have to determine whether you want to do this. Do I present it verbally? Do I get up in front of an audience? And it could be a virtual audience. We don't know where the pandemic will be at in October. Or it could be a face-to-face audience. And, you know, when you're going to a conference and presenting for the first time to an audience where there are not many familiar faces, I can assure you those butterflies churn around definitely. You know, it can be quite a nerve or stressful event to present your first conference paper. So there are some advantages and disadvantages to whether you do a presentation or a poster. So you need to consider which would be best for your topic and the type of study. Often there are actually a limited number of spots for an oral presentation, so you may be offered a poster presentation instead. Now, at some conferences, posters can be on display for the whole conference, though sometimes they are given a specific day and timing for presenting. Certainly some of the larger international conferences that I've been very fortunate to present at, I've been allocated a certain day, time, afternoon where your poster has to be up, and then you've got to take it down by the end of that day or the beginning of the next morning. You're also with a poster, depending on what the conference organisers have planned. Sometimes they have poster presentation time in the conference program. So even as a poster presenter, you are expected to be by the board where your poster is, so that if people come round, they can ask you questions about your poster. One of the conferences that I've been to quite a few times, the International Clinical Skills Conference, they actually do a rotation where you actually walk around and you have 3 minutes to actually talk about your poster in front of a small group of people, and that's facilitated by a moderator or chairperson for that poster session. So you've got to decide. Sometimes also it's about if it's your first conference presentation, it's about what you will feel most comfortable with. And I think that's a very important element to remember. So you've decided that you're going to do an oral presentation, or you've decided you're going to do a poster. You then need to come up with your title. And it's very important that you ensure that you take some time to construct the title, because sometimes that title can be something that really hooks a reviewer in. The other thing that you need to consider is the themes of the conference. So for the Hume Region Conference, the themes are collaboration, innovation, and capacity building. So when you're thinking about your title, you need to think about these themes. And if you can't, I'm not saying you have to incorporate those words within your title, but perhaps your title needs to think or demonstrate that your project might have some innovation to it, or it might demonstrate your title that it's got some collaborative element to it, or that it's about building workforce capacity. So to give you some examples of some titles, so this title here, does vaccinating children and adolescents with inactivated influenza virus inhibit the spread of influenza in unimmunised residents of rural communities? Oh, what a mouthful. So some people go for the catchy title or the complex titles, or sometimes the misleading title. So you want people to come to your talk so they're clear about what you'll be talking about. And remember, people quickly scan conference programs. So the title, this one here, has perhaps too many unnecessary words in it. Influenza vaccination of children, a randomised trial. So all of a sudden, if you read this, come across this title, you'll go randomised trial. Oh, that's where some people have been given the vaccination and some people haven't. And what's been the effect of this, whether you're immunised or not. So that already is telling you a lot about this particular presentation, and that it's focused in children. So that to me gives enough information, but maybe not, well, vaccination of children. Which children? Where were these children vaccinated? It could be anywhere. So by adding in rural communities, all of a sudden you've got the effects of child influenza vaccination on infection rates. So it's giving you a lot more information than this one. And it's not nearly as wordy as the first title on this page. As I said, people scan conference programs very quickly, and it's the title that often will sing out to someone, oh, that looks like it might be an interesting paper, I'll read the abstract. So once I've seen the conference title and a program, then people will go and read the abstract and then make a decision whether they'll go and have a look. So that's title, as I said, very effective, short and easy to understand. So once you've got your title sorted out, then you need to think about your introduction. So your introduction is the gateway into your work. It's that opening sentence that the background statement is one of the most important sentences. So take time to craft a simple, concrete, introductory sentence that will engage the audience. Mel suggests avoid starting this section with little is known about. This is a flag to peer reviewers that an inadequate literature review was not done or that you may be embellishing your case. So rather share with your readers what is known. And I'll give you a couple of examples of abstract I worked on, in fact, a couple of abstracts. Same research project, slightly different angles that we were presenting. So this first one here talks about students who enrol in courses that lead to registration as registered nurses in Australia spend approximately 1/3 of their course time within a healthcare setting. However, the benefits to students, people receiving care in the health setting are not well understood, and students are often perceived as a burden within these environments. And for those of you who this afternoon are watching from a nursing discipline will understand this quite well, and that might intrigue you to think, oh, I might go and see what this research project discovered. The second abstract opening sentence we used in presenting another aspect of the research. In the current climate of increasing student numbers, changing funder models, it's important to better understand the ways in which nursing students interact with the health service in their role as learners and contributors. So that's just a couple of examples. So then from getting your title, your opening sentence, then it's about purpose. So what was the intriguing question that actually drove your research? What was it? And that often that intriguing question comes back from that original question that you had out there in practice, that you started to maybe question something about an element of practice or the way that your students are engaging in their learning experiences, but usually it's that intriguing question that drove your research, and that's what the purpose of your project or research is about. Sorry about that. Then once you've got your purpose listed, you need to talk about what the method is, and it's very, try not to overwhelm with lots of methodological details. You can keep this quite simple. So in writing the abstract, what you need to do is to keep the title brief, focused, informative, and avoid gimmicks that make it attractive. Your background, again, brief, establish the problem that needed investigation. Because what you need to remember, often for conference abstracts, you might be allowed 200 words, you might be allowed 300 words. There's not many conferences that I've presented at where they go much above 350. That's quite generous for a conference abstract. So that's why you need to keep it background brief. Your aim, clearly spell out the aim or aims of the study, and that can be done in a 1 or 2 sentence statement. And then when you're talking about your methods, the general methodological approach. So was this a qualitative study, mixed method study, randomized controlled trial? Did you use questionnaire, interview? How did you do it? Was it a mail out questionnaire, an online survey? So keep it quite concise. Then as you're moving through the title, your background, your aims, your method, then you need to talk about your results. So you need to be able to synthesize this data into the simplest form. You need to be able to, possibly within the context of the story you're telling. So in your conference abstract, use statistics sparingly, and significant p-values, if you've done a little bit of quantitative data analysis, should be placed in brackets after the findings where appropriate. The biggest barrier to writing a clinical vignette abstract is getting the project started. So sometimes in overcoming this obstacle, you can imagine that you're telling a colleague about an interesting case and simply put the words on the paper. So determine your abstract headings for the conference to which you'll be submitting, and don't necessarily worry about the word limits or style at that time. And that's important because some conference abstracts guidelines will tell you quite specifically the types of headings that they want you to use. They can be very, very prescriptive. I know, for example, Nurse Education Today, Nurse Education in Practice Conference, they have a template and it has very, very clear, specific headings that you need to use. And if you don't use their template, your abstract is not accepted. So you've done your results, and the next step you need to think about are the implications and the conclusion. So you need to be realistic in your conclusion. So mention the impact of your study, but avoid speculating beyond what's evidenced by your results. You can also maybe mention future directions in the study area, but avoid the buzzword, more studies are needed, because everyone could say that about their research. What people are interested in is understanding what it is specifically about why your project was important and why it holds promise for the future, or how this research might be further expanded, because sometimes what you're presenting might just be a small case study, or it could be a pilot project, and that you want to be able to think about how this might have impact or influence perhaps the delivery of service or one aspect of service within your healthcare. It might be that it's created the stepping stone to really inspire you and motivate you to go on and do higher degree research studies. But you need to think about maybe sometimes what the implications are for practice, or implications for education, or implications for management. Three good areas to think about. So one of the things that you need to do when you've written your whole abstract, you need to think about what we've termed here or phrased here what's called the red thread. And this is a very useful technique to check that your abstract has delivered what you said you're going to deliver. So the red thread is looking at the abstract title and then following that thread through your abstract to see if this flows through your abstract. So what we've proposed, Rowan and I have proposed this afternoon, because we've done enough talking, we're going to get Mitchell to move you into breakout rooms in just a moment. We're going to show you a written abstract, which we have to acknowledge is the work of Dr. Helen Haynes. And we're going to, in your breakout rooms, ask you to try and see if you can locate the red thread in this abstract. So, and what we will do is, as I said, we'll show you the abstract. We will try and copy the abstract into our chat, and we're going to get Rowan, Mitch, to put you into breakout rooms, and we'll give you maybe 5 minutes or so in your breakout rooms to see if you can follow the red thread. The words that the focus of this particular abstract was on attitudes and beliefs of childbirth. However, little is known, is not how I would necessarily start background about, but about women's attitudes towards birth in countries where the caesarean rate, so it's about attitudes there. And was in this project was again comparing women from 2 different countries, their attitudes and beliefs, attitudes that are associated with preferences for mode of birth, attitude and belief statements. Less likely, Australian women were less likely than Swedish to agree they would like a birth that is as pain-free as possible. The Australian women were less likely. So as you can see, where the red is within this abstract, the title of the abstract about women's attitudes and beliefs of childbirth, and in particular this research was a comparison of Swedish and Australian sample of women, that is weaved all the way through this abstract. So that's something that one needs to try and do when you're constructing your abstract. So once you've constructed your abstract, well, you think, oh, it's done and dusted. Well, not quite, because you've drafted or crafted your abstract. If you're in a project team, you need to think about circulating it to your project team for revisions. You then do a final check before you hit that submit button. Now, some conferences, when you go to submit your abstract, they ask for you to upload a presenter's biography or brief biography. And the other thing that you need to do before you submit, when you're crafting your abstract, you also need to be circulated to your team. You need to determine the authorship, who has contributed. So, and in particular, if there's a big team, you need to think about who has contributed to this abstract and to this aspect of the research. So one of the projects that I worked on a couple of years ago had the cast of 10,000 on the project team, and it was across 3 states, several universities, and so team members said, oh, look, I wasn't actively engaged in the fieldwork data collection, so I'm happy not to be co-authored on this particular abstract. So, sometimes hopefully your colleagues are quite open to acknowledging their contribution or not, sometimes to the research, and whether that they need to be included as a co-author. That final check is very important. Carefully review your spelling, avoid or use a minimum of abbreviations in your abstract. So you need to write a bio, and often these bios, it could be 50 words, 60 words. The most I've seen for conference abstracts is the bio of 100 words. They want something that's short and sharp and succinct, that explains to an audience, a potential audience, to other attendees at the conference, who you are. So it's not about, oh, well, I love going horse riding and growing tomato plants. This is your professional bio. So your bio, and this is, I'm providing you with a very simple example of a brief bio. As you'll see on the screen, this is 76 words. So it tells you what my current position is and where I work. It explains my background in research, that, how I've published extensively in either refereed or refereed conference abstracts. It also tells you a little bit about what I do outside of my work. So, that I'm editor on a couple of journals, and it will tell someone who doesn't know anything about me, if they were just reading it, well, she's a fellow of the Australian College of Nursing and state chair for the Victoria Network. So, one could clearly make the assumption that Jenny Weller-Newton clearly must have a nursing connection somewhere. So that's an example of a very brief bio. So you've submitted, you've done your bio, you go, great, now, is it going to be accepted or not? So you get that wonderful email going, congratulations, your abstract's been accepted. So, wow, fantastic. It's so exciting. I can remember still the first time I had my first conference abstract accepted for an international conference. And it was research back from when I did my doctoral thesis. I was very excited because it was being hosted in Germany, and I was just gobsmacked And when I got to Germany to present at this conference, I discovered I was the only Australian. So that's another story to tell you all one day. However, it was a great way to connect with some amazing American scholar and some Swedish colleagues at the time. So you've got the ideas, you started to be able to craft and pitch your story about your research. So maybe besides presenting it at a conference, think about, would this be of interest to a wider audience? Should I think about trying to get this project published? So if you think you'd like to publish your project or study, then one of the first things you need to consider these days is if you meet the EQUATOR guidelines. And these are guidelines that look at the rigour of your study design. So the website is at the bottom of this particular slide. So EQUATOR has specific guidelines for reporting all of the main types of studies. So whether it was an observational study, whether it was a case study, whether it was a qualitative study, and a lot more and more journals are requesting that as part of your submission process, when you're working up and submitting a manuscript for consideration, that you also upload the relevant EQUATOR reporting guidelines for the type of study design that you have used. So for those of you who come from a nursing background, I can tell you now that Collegian requires the EQUATOR reporting guidelines for all of their research papers. I think Nurse Education Today, Nurse Education Today does as well. A lot of the, it's increasingly becoming a requirement. So it's just something to consider and worth bookmarking that website as one of your favourites if you're thinking of moving forward and doing some publications. There's a couple of references there for you. We're now going to open this up to questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or put the questions in the chat room. And you're welcome to put in your own free text comments into this. Thank you, everyone, for joining Rowan and I this afternoon. It's as a remind you that this has been recorded. We might do a little bit of editing on it before it's made available, and Rowan and I just need to think where we're going to locate this at the moment, that it would be available for others to access or for you to go back and review at a later date as you're working on your conference abstracts. So thank you again. It's been a pleasure to be here this afternoon in North East Health Wangaratta running this virtual workshop or webinar.